Warning: as this video deals with really controversial political figures, it will of course contain my own personal political beliefs. If you are easily offended by my critiques, just know that any hostile trolling comments will be blocked. My channel, my rules. Also, this video is intended for an older audience and, as such, contains humor and language that may not be suitable for children. Hello, and welcome to Farcical Moments from History, where I look at various events that, as ridiculous as they sound, really happened. In this episode, as a response to recent events,
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th President of the United States, winning the White House and denying President Trump a second term.
Yeah, no surprise, Wolf. This first reaction coming in, a tweet from the president. It says, and I can read it to you, it says, our case strongly continues. We will keep up the good fight, and I believe we will prevail.
We will look at the last time an American president tried desperately to stave off an inevitable downfall. This occurred from November 1973 to September 1974, as the Watergate scandal approached its climax. During this time, infamous American President Richard Nixon found himself increasingly put in an unwinnable situation. As he tried to save his presidency through increasingly desperate measures and appeals to his supporters, only to suffer one of the most humiliating ends to a presidency that has ever happened.
What is it about the television coverage of you in these past weeks and months that has so aroused your anger?
Don't get the impression that you arouse my anger. You see,
I have that impression.
you see, one can only be angry with those he respects.
As mentioned in my earlier video about Richard Nixon's misadventures at various Disney parks, near the end of 1973, he tried to end the investigation into his administration's cover-up of the break-in at the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate complex by purging the Department of Justice's leadership. This purge, which went down in infamy as the Saturday Night Massacre, resulted in not only mass condemnation by the press and the public, but failed in its ultimate goal because, due to his failure to have its staff fired along with its leader, Archibald Cox, the main investigation into the cover-up was not terminated. Which, to play devil's advocate, seems like a really fucking stupid oversight on Nixon's part.
You know, the White House announced we were abolished, but if they announced the sky is green and then you look up and the sky is blue...
Even the replacement of Cox with conservative lawyer Leon Jaworski did little to help Nixon, as Jaworski made it clear very quickly that he would not go easy on the president. Unlike a certain future special prosecutor,
I am following the precedent that every president, Democrat and Republican, since the time of Washington has followed, and that is of defending the confidentiality of presidential conversations and communications.
By the time of Jaworski's appointment, the Watergate scandal had become focused on the revelation that Nixon had secretly installed a tape recording system in the Oval Office for the purpose of providing an audio record of all of his meetings. It was Cox's insistence that the tapes themselves, and not summaries of them, would be the only acceptable evidence provided by the White House that prompted the Saturday Night Massacre in the first place. Jaworski was just as insistent, demanding that Nixon provide several tapes pertaining to alleged conversations that had been conducted, with the purpose of covering up White House involvement with the break-in. Nixon, however, was perpetually insistent that the tapes were presidential documents and, as such, he had the executive privilege to limit access to them. Of course, such an overly defensive stance made Nixon appear to be a president who was not very forthcoming with the truth, particularly since these tapes contained many conversations he had with various aides who, by this time, were facing serious criminal charges themselves. Understanding, however, that the public had reacted badly to the Saturday Night Massacre, Nixon agreed to release a select few of the tapes, but made it clear that he would resist demands for more of them. As the first batch of tapes was provided to Jaworski's team, it did not take long for one to cause severe consternation. This was a tape that was recorded 3 days after the Watergate break-in occurred. In it, when said break-in was about to be discussed, there suddenly appeared an abrupt 18.5-minute gap in which the only sound to be heard was a loud hum. That certainly doesn't raise any red flags. Immediately, Nixon's secretary Rosemary Woods, a close family friend who had loyally served him during much of his political career, came forward and claimed that she must have accidentally erased the tape. According to her, she was seated near the tape player when the phone rang, distracting her and causing her to accidentally push her foot on the ROM pedal of the tape player. During her questioning by Jaworski and his team, Woods was asked to demonstrate how this accidental erasure occurred in a mock-up of her office. To the amazement of everyone, when Woods reached for the phone, her foot came off of the pedals of the tape player provided, an action which would have automatically turned it off. Upon being made aware of this, a flustered Woods responded defensively, "Well, it was different in my office. It was different in my office." In reaction to this, Jaworski and his team had Woods reenact her alleged accidental erasure in her actual office. During this, Woods cartoonishly attempted to stretch her arm to the phone while firmly pushing her foot down on the erasure pedal to the tape player. An effort, later mocked in the press as the Rosemary Stretch, that most people probably wouldn't have bothered with when answering a telephone. With Woods' explanation discredited, Nixon's chief of staff Alexander Haig provided another outlet for mockery in the press by vaguely suggesting that perhaps a, quote, sinister force had messed up the tape. A comment that caused him to become bombarded with letters from demonologists from all over the country. Remember, this was just over a year after The Exorcist had come out, and interest in the occult was at an all-time high across the nation in the wake of that movie's massive success. In the end, a panel of experts analyzed the tape and tape recorders in the White House and determined in their report the following spring that the gap in the tape was the result of at least 5 different attempts to erase it, undertaken by an individual who did not know how to operate the machine. Well, that doesn't sound shady at all. Since Woods herself used that machine on a daily basis, it was unlikely that she was responsible for such a botched attempt.
There's no one more loyal, no one more honest, no one more efficient than Rosemary Woods, and I am utterly confident that she did not erase anything.
Making it likely that Nixon, who was known to be clumsy and inept at operating machinery, or one of his main cronies had messed up the tape themselves. Such a revelation served to confirm that the tapes would be the key to either Nixon's survival or the death of his presidency.
Mr. President, Dan Rather with CBS News. President,
Are you running for something?
no, sir, Mr. President, are you?
With pressure to release requested tapes to Jaworski's team mounting, and knowing that he couldn't afford to attempt another purge of the Justice Department, in late April, Nixon and his advisors came up with a solution that, they hoped, would satisfy public opinion about the president's innocence when it came to whether he did impeachable actions, and put public pressure on Jaworski's team to back down. Rather than release the tapes, Nixon oversaw the creation and publication of edited transcripts of the tapes.
Everything that is relevant is included, the rough as well as the smooth.
While the publication of these transcripts did cause a sensation across the nation, they did so in a way that really did little to help Nixon. Firstly, the segments of them that described Nixon's involvement, with the efforts to provide hush money to the men who had initiated the Watergate break-in, prompted a fierce backlash. Even among Nixon's usual political allies like Senate Minority Leader Hugh Scott, who declared that the transcripts revealed a deplorable, disgusting, shabby, and immoral performance on the part of the president. Not only this, but Jaworski's team, comparing the parts of the transcripts that correlated to the tapes that had been provided to them earlier, found that Nixon had doctored them so as to make his actions not seem criminal. This in turn suggested that the entirety of the transcripts was very inaccurate, making their use as evidence unacceptable. In addition, the transcripts provided an outlet for increased mockery of Nixon in the eyes of the public, as there were many times in the transcripts where the words unintelligible and expletive deleted appeared, the latter of which Nixon and his aides claimed was the work of his pious and easily offended lawyer Fred Bizart. Because the president swearing was clearly the real crime being committed here. Perhaps worst of all for Nixon, the negative reaction to the transcripts prompted increased calls for either his impeachment or his resignation, with formal hearings regarding the former beginning in the House Judiciary Committee on May 9th. Nixon, however, showing the traits of a reckless gambler who would go for broke before quitting, felt that he had enough strong cards in his hand to ensure his survival.
I wonder if you could share with us your thoughts. Tell us what goes through your mind when you hear people who love this country and people who believe in you say reluctantly that perhaps you should resign or be impeached. Well, I'm glad we don't take the vote of this room, we say.
When it became clear to Nixon that the release of the heavily edited transcripts had failed to assuage either the public, which was steadily losing its faith in Nixon, or Jaworski's team, which kept demanding the tapes themselves as evidence, Nixon appealed to Judge John Sirica of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia to force Jaworski to stand down. To Nixon's dismay, Sirica ruled in favor of Jaworski. Not willing to accept this decision, Nixon appealed his case to the Supreme Court, believing that the largely Republican-appointed justices, some of whom had been appointed during his very presidency, would make a decision in his favor. Unfortunately for him, Nixon was president a little too early to benefit from the practice of appointing obvious political lackeys to the Supreme Court. The case that followed, United States v. Nixon, would be a landmark case that would set a precedent for establishing the limits of a president claiming executive privilege.
That it had been established that the conversations we're talking about here today did involve a criminal conspiracy, would you still be asserting an absolute privilege?
Yes, quite clearly.
What public interest is there in preserving secrecy with respect to a criminal conspiracy?
How are you going to impeach him if you don't know about it?
Well, if you know about it, then you can state the case. If you don't know about it, you never had it.
You know the president's doing something wrong, you can impeach him. But the only way you can find out is this way. You can't impeach him, so you don't impeach him. You're losing it someplace wrong.
Well, this case really presents one fundamental issue. Who is to be the arbiter of what the Constitution says? Now, the president may be right in how he reads the Constitution, but he may also be wrong. And if he is wrong, who is there to tell him so? And if there's no one, what then becomes of our constitutional form of government?
In a stunningly unanimous decision, the court ruled on July 24th that a president could not use executive privilege as an excuse to deny access to any presidential documents that could be used as evidence in a criminal investigation. In essence, the Supreme Court was saying, tough shit, Dick. Give Leon the tapes. Nixon, however, waited 6 days until he agreed to release the tapes, with dire consequences for him resulting on Capitol Hill.
As we all know, you're an experienced student of the Constitution. I think people would be interested to know what you consider to be an impeachable offense for President.
Well, Mr. Rather, you don't have to be a constitutional lawyer to know that the Constitution is very precise in defining what is an impeachable defense, an impeachable offense.
Just 3 days after the Supreme Court made its decision, the House Judiciary Committee began its formal vote on whether to pass articles of impeachment against Nixon. Initially, there was concern that there would not be enough bipartisan support to legitimize the proceedings. A concern that was sadly validated many years later when the time came for another serious impeachment inquiry. Indeed, many of the Republicans in the committee made impassioned arguments predicated on how they had not seen any direct implication that Nixon had committed any high crimes or misdemeanors, the constitutional requirement for impeachment proceedings to commence.
And
and in what respect, and how did the President declare that policy? And I wish the gentleman would be rather specific, since it is the heart of the allegation.
Simple parking ticket has to be specific. It has to say what you did that violated the law. It's got to have the license of your car. It's got to have the date that you did it. You want to replace that and say that doesn't have to apply to the president? Why, this is ridiculous.
I'm just trying to think, hurt yourself a autograph too. Just remember, that's right. You can say you forgot, didn't you? Sure. Sorry. But you can't be good to say I was in perfect situation. But you can't really say I don't remember, I can't recall, I can't really answer that. There's no denying the fact that the White House and Ehrlichman, Hallam, and Dean are involved in some of the early money decisions. I would say these people are going to cost $1 million over the next few years.
You on the money, if you need the money. I mean, where money is, you can get $1 million, and you can get it in cash. I know where it can be gotten.
These arguments, however, were rebuffed with skillful citing of the numerous pieces of evidence that were publicly known that revealed how Nixon had had substantial involvement with the Watergate cover-up.
Specifically, on March 13, 1973, the president was told that Mr. Strawn had lied to investigators. Specifically, the president, who bears the ultimate responsibility for the enforcement of our laws, did not report this to the Attorney General or to the director of the FBI.
The president discussed the matter of paying Hunt 10 separate times in a conversation on March 21st with Dean and Haldeman. And the last time the president discussed it, he said, and I quote, "That's why for your immediate thing, you've got no choice with Hunt but the 120 or whatever it is, right? Would you agree that that's a buy-time thing? You better damn well get that done, but fast. Well, for Christ's sake, get it." Perhaps some people find ambiguities in that conversation. I don't.
In the end, with a solid bipartisan vote, from July 27th to July 30th, the House Judiciary Committee passed 3 articles of impeachment against Nixon, charging him with obstruction of justice, abuse of presidential power, and contempt of Congress. Nixon, although appalled at being the first president since Andrew Johnson to face an impeachment, believed that he still had an outlet for survival. As laid out in the Constitution, while the House of Representatives can lay charges against the president and vote to put them on trial, only the Senate can try and convict them. Even then, a president can only be removed by a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate. Being very aware of this, Nixon felt that he could rely on enough support from the conservative Republicans and Southern Democrats, who, fun fact, were strongly critical of civil rights and public protests, that constituted his core base. Just imagine, a president obviously going down in flames hoping that his core base holds the rest of the country hostage to save him. That would be silly, right?
I can assure you that you don't need to worry about my getting seasick or jumping ship. I'm going to stay in that helm till we bring it into port.
Nixon's hopes for survival in a Senate trial evaporated, however, as he reviewed the tapes that the Supreme Court decreed that he needed to release. Listening to a taped conversation from June 23, 1972, just 6 days after the Watergate break-in occurred, Nixon heard himself authorizing his aides to have the CIA force the FBI's investigation of the break-in to halt by claiming that it threatened the nation's well-being.
On the investigation, the Democratic person, it's not the problem there is because the FBI is not under control. And that will fit rather well because the FBI agents who are working the case at this point feel that's what it is the CIA. The problem is the physical, the whole bad thing. The sort of comedy of errors is our element. The president believes it's going to open a whole
Understanding that this directly implicated him as the central figure of the cover-up, which was the exact opposite of what he had been telling his political allies, his lawyers, and the public for the past 2 years, Nixon wondered what he could do to possibly save himself. Seeing no other options left to him, Nixon and his aides decided to abruptly release the tape to the public on August 5th, hoping against hope that it would stun the public beyond comprehension. As with most desperate hopes, it didn't work.
The President made public 3 new transcripts of meetings with his former chief aide, H.R. Bob Haldeman, all June 23, 1972.
Interfering with an FBI investigation can be obstruction of justice, a felony. But almost as damaging are other disclosures in that June 23rd conversation revealing a pattern of lies and distortions by Mr. Nixon and his men about Watergate.
Nixon, as he leaves the White House here to board the helicopter for the flight to California. And there's the president waving goodbye, and you hear the applause.
With the release of the tape to the public, the end of Nixon's presidency was in sight. As a last-ditch effort to save himself, Nixon reached out to his most loyal political allies to see if they could save him in an impeachment trial in the Senate. First, he called Alabama's infamously racist governor George Wallace, who wielded tremendous influence on Southern Democrats, asking if he could count on his support, only for Wallace to tell him that he was sad to say that he couldn't support him anymore. While this was going on, those Republicans in the House Judiciary Committee who had previously voted against the articles of impeachment announced that they would now support a full vote for impeachment in the House of Representatives. As an attempted Hail Mary, on the night of August 7th, Nixon met with the main Republican leaders in Congress and Senator Barry Goldwater, who, interestingly enough, was pretty much the king of the extreme conservatives, and was someone who actually thought a nuclear war was winnable. Upon asking them if he had any hope of survival in a full impeachment, Nixon was told that, given concerns about the upcoming midterm elections, the House was certain to vote for it, and he could only count on just over a dozen senators to vote to have him acquitted, less than half the number he needed. Faced with this reality, Nixon made preparations for what would be his last televised address to the American people. The following evening, just before the cameras rolled, Nixon had one last moment where he tried to rather pitifully dictate how events will unfold.
Ollie, no, only the CBS crew now is to be in this room during this. Only the crew. No, there will be no picture.
As millions across the nation, and indeed the world, watched, the president made his fateful announcement.
I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
The following morning, Nixon gave a farewell address to the White House staff, in which he imparted advice that he himself probably wished he had heeded.
Always remember, others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them. And then you destroy yourself.
Following this, Nixon and his family were helicoptered away from the White House, and Vice President Gerald Ford was sworn in as the 38th President of the United States. And, interestingly, the only one to have never been elected, as he was appointed Vice President during Nixon's second term. Just 1 month later, arguing that the need to end the nation's trauma over Watergate overrode the need for justice to be equally distributed, Ford proclaimed a presidential pardon for Nixon for any alleged criminal activities during his presidency. In essence, saying that a sitting president could get away with any crime, with humiliation being their only punishment. As to be expected, this action served to severely piss off many in the nation, and enable conspiracy theories about Ford making a deal to become president, which played a major role in Ford's failed election bid in 1976. In addition, Ford had made a deal allowing Nixon to have custody of the tapes as part of his presidential papers. which would have enabled him to hide his guilt for the rest of his life. Due to immense public pressure, Ford was forced to back out of this deal when Congress voted overwhelmingly to pass the Presidential Recordings and Materials Preservation Act, which placed all of Nixon's presidential papers, including the tapes, under federal protection. With this action, the saga of the Watergate scandal came to a close, with Nixon spending the rest of his life vainly trying to convince everyone that he had not broken the law and that he was the victim of political machinations.
I fouled up in the area where I'm supposed to be a master, the area of just politics. Now, I did not have a corrupt motive. My motive was pure political containment, and political containment is not a corrupt motive. Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal. If, for example, the president approves something because of a threat to internal peace and order of significant magnitude, then the president's decision in that instance is one that enables those who carry it out to carry it out without violating a law.
Can you imagine a president being that much of a sore loser? Shit. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell. Also, follow me on Twitter at PCNHGuy. If you want to help me make more videos similar to this, or you just want to support my channel, maybe consider contributing to my Pop Culture and History Guy Patreon and get a shout out in my future videos, as well as other benefits. Just as long as you have a username that won't get me demonetized if I say it out loud. Again, any hateful comments will be blocked. My channel, my rules. Have a nice day.